Welcome to Hope Blooms, a podcast from the Early Pregnancy Loss Association.
At EPLA, we seek to support women and families suffering early pregnancy loss by providing resources, education, and community. It is our vision that no one suffers miscarriage alone.
Welcome back to Hope Blooms. I am Emily Carrington, EPLA's Executive Director, and with me today is our President, Maria Servold. I am excited to finally record this episode. Not only has it been a while since I've been on the podcast, but this episode is something I've thought about for years, and I'm excited to finally talk about it. So today we are going to talk about the book, I'll Love You Forever.
Mm-hmm. A classic.
Did you read this book as a child?
Yes. Yes, we did. We have several copies at home because one is one from when I was a kid, and then people gave us one when we were expecting my oldest. So that's really fun. And yeah, it says it was published in 1986, so it's been around for quite a while.
Yes, I was born in 1987, so it was definitely in our house. And I was raised just with this was one we read regularly and definitely had the song memorized, which is interesting because I think we just said it as a poem.
Yeah, we did too. Yeah.
Even though I was raised by musicians, we never put it to music, but said it as a poem and said it a lot. And I had a really special place in my heart as a kid because it was just regularly repeated and said. So I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. It's a poem. And then I learned almost 10 years ago, around the same time that I had my losses and we started EPLA, and all of a sudden there was this conversation about pregnancy loss and miscarriage and things were sort of growing. I actually found the 2016 HuffPost article about the background of this book. And I feel like at the same time, before I get into that, there was a little bit of like backlash on this book, sort of the second generation, reading it to our kids. People started to sort of be weirded out by this imagery of the mother climbing into the window and never letting her baby grow up.
Right.
But I think it's definitely not a full reading when you understand the author's intent. And I think it's sort of unfortunate. When I was a kid, I never thought that my parents would actually like climb in my window and not let me grow up.
Right. I always just as a kid thought, my mom will always take care of me was like what I took away from it, or like she'll love me forever, even when I'm a grown up. And,
right.
Yeah.
Right. And I loved that imagery of yes, I always understood the second half of the book to be very symbolic of that, right? That parents' ongoing love, and no matter how independent or free or wherever I go, they'll still remember me as their baby.
Yep.
And that's a special, not that, I don't think that has anything to do with being incapable or under their parenthood, but more that there's a special tenderness and a special sort of, again, that symbolism of that I was their baby. So all of that build up to say this book then so I always liked it, and I was always on the side of this book. And then this article came out in 2016 talking about the author's intent for the book. And the book was actually written after Robert Munsch and his wife had a second stillbirth. And the poem it says in this article, and I'll post an article, he would sing it to himself after his wife gave birth to the stillborn baby.
Wow.
And it was his own process of grieving, and that he couldn't even it says, this article is great, that the song was too painful to sing out loud, and he couldn't even share it with his wife. And just such this beautiful picture we talk a lot, right, about carrying on our lost children with us, right? And just the added power of the symbolism, I think,
Mm-hmm.
when you understand this is not some helicopter parent climbing in their children's window, but the opposite, a parent who had to let their baby go
Mm-hmm.
immediately
Mm-hmm. And can only imagine all these
and
moments then.
and completely.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, and won't get the chance to have the toddler flushing things down the toilet and the teenager with the weird music. Strange friends and strange music.
yes.
Yeah. Right. And that makes it so much more, I mean, it's beautiful. It's like without knowing that, it's still this beautiful book, but then knowing that makes it so much more powerful and um inclusive is sort of a weird word, but it's like it includes, these other sorts of stories of babies besides just I have a baby and I'll love it forever. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I know the lost community talks a lot, right, about knowing exactly what age
Mm-hmm.
your baby would. I know I felt this a few years ago when kindergarten. I didn't have a kindergartner, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's some milestones that the lost community realizes, right? Like it ripples. You keep feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a loss years ago, 10 years ago. It's that I don't have a 10-year-old.
Right.
That like, and as you move, as that book so beautifully does, into each stage of parenthood, the loss is repeated
Mm-hmm.
in a different way. But this one, and I didn't know that Robert Munsch had written like 50 children's books.
Oh, wow.
But
Are
this
any of
one
the other
is
ones
just
as popular?
not. I mean, I don't know that there's any that are quite as popular
Oh,
as
yeah,
this
there's
one
a
at
big
all. I
list of them
mean,
in the back I'm seeing now. I've like never looked at that before, but
this one is just so ubiquitous in
mm-hmm.
everyone's libraries.
It's I mean, I sort of wonder like why what made it get popular? Was it just that it's this beautiful story? Like I wonder if at the time when he wrote it, did he tell the story of where it came from or not? Um yeah, like when did it become really popular? Right after he wrote it, or you know what I mean? Because it's just I'm sort of curious. But well, and what about then
well,
toward the?
and
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say this article is saying that like most of his stories were a long process,
Mm.
but this one sort of came to him immediately,
Hmm.
which is just sort of this like lightning kind of struck,
Right.
right? But it managed to get, I think, to that criticism aside, and even the criticism I think is evidence that it resonates with people, like, and that we all know this book. The sort of, it gets to that deep truth of not just parenthood, but also that cycle and relationship. You are either a parent or a child,
Yep.
and there's something just so deep and lasting, and I think too, to combat the criticism a little bit, it's not about a helicopter clingy parent at all. If it was, you wouldn't really need this book. That even the natural
Mm-hmm.
parenting relationship with a healthy living child necessitates this ongoing distance and independence.
Right.
And the book is acknowledging that,
Mm-hmm.
and then is saying, despite all of that, I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. And each little phase as he goes, he's demonstrating more and more independence, or more and more frustration, or
Mm-hmm.
more and more whatever it would be. I mean, obviously, right, like those teenage years, it's like ways to like that are like annoying or shove a
Mm-hmm.
wedge. And then obviously as he grows up, the he's not annoying anymore, but he's still now independent and has a
Mm-hmm.
family of his own. And
And
so
only
I
lives
think the
across
book,
town, which is nice.
yes, yes,
He didn't move across the
um,
country. He just moved across town.
yes, but the book assumes some sort of natural maturing,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and I think that's something that the author like also misses, right? Like, there's just this
Yeah.
cycle that like the maturity of your children is beautiful and painful at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, and then not having the opportunity to experience that with your children. And
Mm-hmm.
the family went on to adopt 3 more children,
Mm.
but that doesn't replace these
Yep.
children.
Right.
And I think it's just really, I can't read it anymore without just utterly like losing it. Especially as I know the story, and by the time I always think like I'm doing great, I'm not gonna cry, I'm walking away, he's already a man.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, the best.
Like
It's
the
like
last 2 pages, and I'm like,
the best children's books. Yeah, make the parents cry, and the kids are like, "Mom, what's wrong?" Yeah. Well, the
why are
picture
you
of him
crying?
holding his little sweet old mommy. It's and that's so sweet too. That like then it, I'm curious about that. Like when he added that the last, well, not the last bit where he's rocking his own daughter. That sort of makes sense. But when he's rocking his mom, that's, I mean, to imagine that that's the child that he didn't have being able to hold, um, sort of extra amazing that he was able to
Oh,
do
I
that.
know. And I mean that's just another facet and layer, right, of the
Mm-hmm.
whole child loss tragedy, is that you've lost your baby, but your identity as a parent has also been challenged or tainted or
Right.
nicked, right? Like there's no one to call you mom,
Mm-hmm.
or there's one less person to call
Yep.
you mom.
Right.
And then yeah, to just move forward in the cycle of life is that yeah, those
Yeah.
last few pages
Yeah.
are just
Yeah, and with the thing you said about the kid maturing in all these stages, I think often with, you know, lost parents would think, "Oh, I'm not yet." I mean, the things you think of immediately are like, "What about their first birthday?" or "What about when they start school?" But you maybe don't necessarily extrapolate all the way out, right? Like, what about when they get married and all these kinds of, like we often think of our lost babies as babies always, right? Not all the way through adulthood. And so I like that
yes,
you think about all those moments.
there yes, there's a tendency for them to be perpetually
Mm-hmm.
a baby in
Yeah.
our mind,
Mm-hmm.
which is yeah, back to your like question on why was this one so successful.
Mm.
He says at the end of this interview with HuffPost, for someone who picks up the book, it's their story, not mine. And
Mm.
I think that's just what the book does so brilliantly. Like, even if you don't know the story, but
Yeah.
even once I knew the story, then it became even more powerful. But that it's just this driving true reality
Yep.
that can come with, and that the fact that it's, he says too that it's, it's sort of the perfect story, right? It's how it's supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it might not. There's so many tragic things that can affect that relationship between a
Mm-hmm.
parent and a child. And maybe that's what is so compelling, is and that he wrote it from a place of tragedy.
Yeah.
Looking at this cycle the way it's supposed to be,
Mm-hmm.
it's just so compelling for parents to instill in their children. And just this unconditional lavish love, right? Like, that our kids
Yes.
just need to know.
Yes. Yeah, that the comfort of them knowing you'll always be there, And so then from the lost parent's perspective, it's like, I'll still be here, even though you're not here, baby, I'll always still be here. Yeah, but it's, so comforting for kids to know. And yeah, like whenever I've read it to my kids, I feel like they don't at all feel like it's weird that that the mom drives to his house and with the ladder and everything. It's It's like in a child's mind, it's like, oh, my mommy will always still be here, you know?
Yeah, I personally like. I wonder if, like, when it was written, that was not a thing I
Yeah.
had, and maybe if the age of helicopter parenting has
Yeah.
ruined the symbolism.
Yes.
Because I never thought my parents would climb into my window.
Right. It's sort of just, like it's the way to express in a children's book and with pictures that the parent will always be there, you know? I don't know.
Yeah, and I love just the rhythm and the circularness, and nothing changed. I like, because it's a book and it's literature. It's not a work of nonfiction. I love the way the symbolism just drives in circles through the whole thing.
Yep.
So like if he would have let the book change in any way and like let the relationship, like not let that poem be anchoring,
right,
it would have lost its impact.
Right.
So every time that poem is said, it needs to be in the exact same setting for it to be that powerful, to demonstrate, not because you should climb into your children's window and rock them when they're in their 30s, but because, it's symbolic of that unending, constant, circular, I will always be there, I will always come back, this reality, I love you forever, I like you for always, as long as you're living, my baby will be. The words she says never change.
Right. Yeah.
And so the way he wrote it, just, I think, brilliant in sort of layers of literature and depth. And it's always great when a children's book maybe we're also just not used to good children's books that have symbolic depth and meaning.
Well, like when I was expecting my now 10, she turns 10 tomorrow. When I was expecting my now almost 10-year-old, people were giving us children's books and we would read them out loud, like to the bump, you know. And I remember my husband reading The Velveteen Rabbit, which I hadn't read since I was a kid. And like he got, you know, most of the way through. And then it's like, the boy's love made you real. I was like, I just lost it. I mean, it's like, it's such a good story. And again, it's an old one, you know, but toward the end here, when after he holds his mom and says, my mommy you'll be, as long as I'm living, my mommy you'll be. And then the next page is when he goes home and stood for a long time at the top of the stairs, which it's interesting. It's almost like the only, you know, what's like that's changing. The text is changing, right? Like there's a shift here, something is happening. And then he goes in and holds his new baby daughter. But it's like the moment of transition to the next generation. And I wonder, you know, in the writing process, what that was, I don't know, because it's almost like the only sad part, if that makes sense. You know, like he pauses at the top of the stairs and you think, why? Like, what is he pausing for? And, you know, his mom is going away, but then he's becoming the parent, you know. Which again, if it's a baby you've lost, wouldn't happen. But it's like that's the little final hope at the end of the story then, is that there's a new generation to sing to, you know.
Yeah, and just the power of articulating that whole cycle of what has been lost.
Yep.
And where I think, it's interesting as the parent, right? And as the generation that was raised on this book, and then as parent, like, who are we in the story? And in that moment, right, like it shifts.
Yep. Well, like as we you know, like I have no grandparents alive anymore, so it's like, you know, my parents are now the grandparents, right? Like they already were grandparents, but now they're that generation. Like there's no one older than them, and you know, and so we're like all shifting up a slot into the next generation of the family, and it's sort of bizarre, but also great, you know, and also sad. Yeah.
Right. As you read it, in some ways, like we get to identify with the little boy and the man,
yeah,
who have been sung this song our whole lives, or said it as a poem, and now hold and rock our own children, or manage. There's something beautiful too that, like, I see a lot in our generation of women, this mid to late 30s, millennials, have done a lot on the front of talking about infant loss and miscarriage. And I'm not saying it hasn't come before us, but I would give millennials a lot of credit for really shaking things loose in the last 15 years. There were definitely sort of forebearers on this. I don't want to take away that, and we've talked about this a lot. Like, there were organizations out there really doing good things. But actually, what I want to do too, though, is give some credit that I think it's interesting that this is the book that we all sort of canonized into our childhood. And I don't want to say it's the thing that led us to do this, but that it's an interesting thing that this is a part of our child experience. And
right, it's been somewhere in us. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the fact, I mean, it's like, I love this book anyway forever. But then once I learned this, I was like, well, now it's even greater. Yeah, and it's it's great. It's awesome, and I love knowing that backstory. I mean, it just gives it so much more meaning and depth, and which is, you love knowing the story, the backstory of things that you love, and so it's like, I would have read this book to my kids anyway, but now I definitely, especially will. So,
it's so beautiful, and I love the subtle reality of it, with also it like comes in and smacks you over the face at the same time. Like,
yep.
It's great. It's a great book. That is my review of it.
Yes. Maria and Emily review 80s children's books.
We could do a whole separate side book on that. But I do hope that if this was a book that annoyed you, if you were not like Maria and I, fond of this book originally, that maybe we've added some depth and perspective. And I would love to hear if we've changed your mind in any way about this book, or if this is something that, if it still bothers you a little bit, or if this, I'd love to hear some feedback on how this has affected your understanding of the book.
Yeah.
But I hope to bring some more attention and awareness to this original meaning and cause, and what made him write it, because I just think it's such a good voice. Yeah. Such a strong voice for the lost.
Well, thank you for listening today.
Thank you for listening to Hope Blooms, a podcast from the Early Pregnancy Loss Association.
To learn more about how we and you can support women suffering early pregnancy loss, visit our website at miscarriagecare.com or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you for listening.